Good day, everyone. My name is Rowan Haarhoff. I'm the business manager at Munro Forensic Actuaries. Welcome to our podcast. We call it a podshot. It's a concentrated shot of espresso right to your brain as we deal with various actuarial topics within the damages industry. My guest today is Julie Valentini. She is our chief actuary. And today we're going to be dealing with life tables and some of the terms that arise within the conversations around life tables. They're not always understood. Things like mortality rates, survival probabilities, and life expectancies. So Julie, before we get into the detail around mortality, won't you tell us what is a life table?
Sure. So a life table is really a table that outlines how many people are alive at different ages in a certain population. So it typically starts with a hypothetical number of, it's generally 100,000, just so that it's big enough that you don't get to fractions at the end. But say 100,000 people alive at age 0. And then it would sort of progress through the ages based on the actual experience of the population being studied. So typically it might get to 99,000 at age 1, 98,500 at age 2, reducing to about 90,000 by age 45. By age 80, it's generally around 25,000, and then 0 by age 100. So it kind of tracks how people live and what age they get to in the population. And it's obviously constructed based on the experience that is being studied. And for example, in South Africa, it would be based on the census data and the National Death Register. The information from there is used to construct a population life table. But other groups, life tables can be constructed for various groups that are studied, as long as there's sufficient information. So typically, life insurers would look at their policyholders and then construct life tables based on the experience that they see in their policyholders. Typically also groups of lives that have certain conditions like cerebral palsy or different illnesses. There may be studies on them over many years, and if there's enough information, then life tables can be produced for them as well. So it's really the big table that outlines, how many people are alive at different ages, and then all the other statistics we're going to talk about are based on that.
And do life tables consider gender?
Yes, so typically that's the main factor that life tables would be split by, because mortality does vary significantly by gender. So you would have, the population, as I explained, starting at 100,000, going down to 0 for males, and then the same for females. If there is other information or other factors that also show a significant difference in mortality, then life tables are often constructed for these different factors. So a life insurer would often have information about smoking status or province or income level or education. There's various things they look at. And if there's a significant difference, they may create different life tables for different factors.
Okay, so we're obviously not in the insurance industry. We're specifically in the damages industry. So why are life tables relevant to our industry, and how are they used in our damages calculations?
Okay, yeah, so they are important because our calculations are affected directly by our choice of life table. The way it's impacting is if we think about a loss of earnings calculation, we would project earnings from the date of accident until retirement. But what we do is we allow for the expected earnings, not the full earnings. So by expected earnings, I mean the earnings times the probability that the person is alive. So if the earnings in a particular month were 10,000 Rand, but there was a 75% chance that they were alive, we would actually allow for 7,500, not 10,000. So it directly impacts the loss that we calculate. And the same is done for medical costs, where it sometimes has an even greater impact because there's some costs that are indicated for the person's entire life. So obviously, the older you get, the less chance there is that you would be alive. So that probability multiplied by the cost has a bigger impact on the calculation. So the choice is a direct impact on the loss that's calculated.
Okay, so when we're talking about sort of mortality and life tables and so on, I've heard terms like survival probabilities and mortality rates. Can you explain how those things relate to life tables?
Okay, so as I said earlier, the life table is the basis that all these things are calculated on. So a survival probability is defined as the probability that someone is alive in 1 year's time. So obviously this varies with different ages, but if we think about that example I gave where there's 100,000 people alive at age 0 and 99,000 at age 1, the probability of getting to age 1 is 99,000 divided by 100,000, which is 99%. So the probability of survival for a newborn in that particular life table is 99%. The same way you would calculate it for someone who's age 45. You would look at the number of people alive at age 46 divided by the number at age 45, and that would give you your probability of survival for a 45-year-old. So that's what that is. Mortality rates are the inverse of that. So obviously there's only 2 states someone can be in. They're either alive or they're not. So if the probability of survival is 99%, the mortality rate is 1%. So it's the probability of dying in 1 year. So, and that is calculated also from the life table. So the life table is the basis that everything is based on.
Okay. So then when we look at life expectancy, how's that different? I looked up on ChatGPT and it said the South African life expectancy is around about 64, 65 years old. How does life expectancy relate to life tables?
Okay, so life expectancy is also calculated from a life table, but it's a single measure. So it's a snapshot of the state of mortality of that population, which is quite useful because if you've got 2 life tables, it's 2 sets of numbers, lots of numbers. So it's hard to kind of get a sense of how the mortality may have changed over time or what's the difference in mortality between, say, 2 countries. It's hard to get that sense looking at life tables in general. So the life expectancy, it's the number of years that someone is expected to live given their current age. So it's calculated based on the life table and it gives you a summary. It sort of summarizes the whole life table in one figure that can be used to then compare trends over time or, just an idea of the state of the mortality of that population.
Yes.
However, it's not granular enough to be used in our calculations. So we are interested in the timing of the earnings, the timing of different things during the claimant's life. So we don't allow for 100% chance of someone being alive until age 65 and then 0 thereafter. We don't allow for certain death at that time. We rather allow for the probability that they would die in every month. And that probability obviously increases over time, but it allows for the timing and the nuances during the lifetime rather than a certain time. So it's just more accurate for our calculation.
And how detailed are we talking about when you're looking at the life tables in terms of the calculation?
So we do it monthly. Yeah, we project. So the life table is yearly, but then we actually derive monthly probabilities of survival from that life table. And then we project every month.
Okay, so basically you're looking at the probability of survival in each month for that particular individual.
Yeah.
So Julie, in our actuarial calculations, we then use the full life table as opposed to the sort of more global life expectancy. Which life tables then do we use when we are calculating the loss?
So we use what is called Life Table 2 from the set of life tables that were produced in 1984-86. And that is the one that is used by most damages actuaries.
So straight away when I hear 1984, 1986, I go, that's a little bit dated sitting here in 2025. Are they still appropriate for today?
Yeah, it is. It's a topic of conversation in the Actuarial Society. We obviously would like more up-to-date tables, but there are reasons for using the 1984-86. So one of the main issues is HIV and AIDS. So from the early 1990s, HIV affected mortality rates significantly. And then with the introduction of antiretrovirals, mortality improved. So the tables that were produced from the 90s to probably today have had this sort of weird distortion with HIV, which has then been reversed. So we need mortality assumptions that are appropriate for, say, the next 50 years. So we don't want to choose ones that are distorted by the HIV epidemic, which has been mitigated to some extent now. So that's one of the issues. The other issue is just data inaccuracies and underreporting of deaths in South Africa, which is quite significant. And there's also uncertainties about some of the census data. So there There are question marks about some of the more recent population tables that have been produced. So in the light of all that, damages actuaries are still sticking to the 1984-86 tables until we can come up with a better one. And there is a project underway at the moment to look at producing a more relevant life table that can be used for damages work.
Okay. So when you say life table 2, in my mind, I'm going, okay, is there a life table 1 and is there a life table 3, 4, 5? Why life table 2? Can you explain the differences?
Yeah, a whole set of tables was produced in 1984-86. In that era, the life tables were split by race. So life table 2 covered the white population, life table 5, the colored population. Life table 1, 3, 4, and 6 were then blends of those two tables or approximations and adjustments to them. So they're not really based on actual experience, those other tables, apart from 2 and 5. So the racial construct of the life tables occurred at a time when people's access to healthcare and economic opportunities was hindered by law. Based on race. But obviously today all South Africans have better access to healthcare and economic opportunities, so we would expect that mortality would have improved over time. Life table 2 is the life table that had the lightest or the best mortality in 1984-86, so it was therefore chosen as the most appropriate, allowing for improvements since 1984-86. So it's therefore used. We use it for all income groups, for all clients or claimants.
So do we have any idea how different the current population's mortality may be from life table 2?
Yeah, so life table 2 has a life expectancy at birth of around 68 for males and 75 for females. And indications are that this is slightly better than the current state of mortality. However, there has been a continual improvement in mortality over time worldwide. And this improvement has been the most pronounced in developing countries. Also, as I said, we're looking up to 50 years into the future. So we want to allow for this continual improvement in mortality. So we therefore feel that life table 2 is not inappropriate. And it's the best we have at this stage.
And do all actuaries use life table 2 now that we've honed on that very specific life table?
Yes, so the vast majority do. It's kind of the generally accepted table. We have seen some actuaries deviate from this practice, and generally it tends to be those acting more for the defendant. So we have seen life tables 3, 4, and 5 used. But yeah, we tend to stick with, we feel quite strongly that you should stick with life table 2 as the default, unless there's very significant reasons why you wouldn't. For example, if you're looking at a cerebral palsy person, they ask very specific life tables for that because it has a significant impact on mortality. But we feel it's dangerous to start doing what we call partial underwriting, which is where you might change life table based on a particular factor about a claimant, but you haven't done a full underwriting of that claimant. So there might be other factors that mitigate. So for example, someone could be in a slightly lower income bracket, which is when we have sometimes seen a worse life table being used. But, we haven't considered the person's access to healthcare or which province they live in or whether they smoke or not, or other things that impact life expectancy as well. So we feel it's dangerous to do partial underwriting. So it's better, in our opinion, to just use the average life table for all claimants, unless there's a deliberate reason not to.
And just in terms of any case law or judgments that we might be available or we might be out there that support the use of a life table 2?
Yeah, so there's 2 in particular, Singh versus Ibrahim and AB and ID versus the MEC for Health and Social Development in the Western Cape. So those 2 judgments support the non-racial classification of life tables and life table 2 in particular. So we do use that when questioned about the life table.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is Rowan. I am a trustee of the Kamvalethu Foundation. I'm not sure if you're aware that together with Munro Forensic Actuaries, you as our client are making a contribution to the education of children in under-resourced areas. For every report that you instruct us on, we give a contribution to Kamvalethu, who supports our project partners in these areas. But you can go even further by making a donation. If you go to our website, munrofa.com, and click on the Giving Back tab. You will find more information. Thank you for your support. All right, so as we end today's podshot, I'd like to thank Julie for her time and just giving us a deeper explanation as to how life tables are used within our calculations. We are going to be following up this podshot with a more in-detailed look at life tables and mortality when we consider life expectancy. If you have any comments, please leave them in the space provided below, or you can email us at actuary@munrofa.com. We have a rich reservoir of resources on our website where you can see previous training, webinars, access to industry templates, and even subscribe to our newsletter. And then we also have Munro TV, which is our YouTube channel where you can see this podshot and others in the series and informative content that goes back many, many years. And then finally, you'll find a link here to our Connect portal. Our Connect portal is exclusively for our clients and has a number of powerful resources that they can access in the determination of their claims. So thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time.